If I asked you to describe C-3PO, I dare say you would not use the term heroic. I bet most of us would use terms like oblivious, bewildered, a particularly melodramatic stand-in for a Greek chorus.
They shut down the main reactor. We'll be destroyed for sure.
He's not a complete joke, at least not in the original Star Wars trilogy.
But this is such a drag.
But generally, he's not terribly helpful, is he? That is, until we reach Return of the Jedi. In this film, C-3PO gets to shine like the golden god the Ewoks believe him to be. I think 3PO turns out to be more useful than anyone else in Return of the Jedi, even though the film itself does not frame his actions this way. I'm not saying this means film are bad, by the way. To be clear, this is not film criticism. There's no problem here in terms of character arcs or anything like that, at least none that I'm concerned with for the sake of this video. What I want to argue is that when I look at the course of events throughout Return of the Jedi without their narrative framing, it appears that the character who deserves the most credit for bringing down the Empire is, funnily enough, not the main hero of this story. It is in fact the character who's generally seemed the least heroic.
Look what happened to me!
So, it might sound like the whole point of this video is to say C-3PO was robbed, where's his bloody medal? And yeah, kinda, but I think there's a better takeaway here, one I find quite heartening in fact, about what it takes to truly make a difference. Let's start by doing a quick recap of Return of the Jedi. So yeah, if you haven't seen that film but want to watch this video anyway, which I suppose is possible, spoilers ahead. The evil Empire has almost finished building a new Death Star, and this time the Emperor himself is hanging out on it instead of whatever else he was doing when the last one blew up. Summering on Naboo maybe? Anywho, this means if the rebels blow up this new one as well, they don't just win a big battle, they win the war. In order to do this, they have to destroy a shield generator on the forest moon of Endor, and then fly into the Death Star and take some easy shots at the super exposed main reactor. Seems simple enough, but of course, things get complicated. The Emperor knows the rebels are going to try to take out the shield generator, so there are way more troops waiting for them than they anticipate. What's more, soon after the rebels arrive on Endor, they all get captured by the moon's natives, sentient teddy bears, who want to eat them. But they eventually make friends with the bears, who prove way more useful than they have any right to be at fighting soldiers with space-age technology. Thanks largely to the help of these bears, or Ewoks as they're apparently called despite never being referred to as such in the film, Han, Leia, Chewie and the Forest Rebels are able to defeat the Imperial forces and blow this thing up, allowing Lando and the Space Rebels to blow that thing up. Why is it a horizontal shockwave this time? Decisively ending the reign of the evil Empire. Oh yeah, and Luke fights his dad, and his dad turns good and throws the Emperor down a big hole. Taking this perspective, you might think the logical conclusion is that the Ewoks are the biggest heroes. And yeah, I think that's actually not far off. But there's a lot of them, and we can't really say which individuals make a significant difference in the battle. So if we were to give out a most valuable player award for Return of the Jedi, who should it go to? Well, how about whoever it is that convinces the Ewoks to get involved in the first place? It's not just because his contribution is so large that I think he deserves the MVP award, it's because it is irreplaceable. In other words, if we take C-3PO out of the equation, odds are no one else would accomplish what he does. Before I go into this in any more detail though, let's consider the other heroes in the Battle of Endor and how replaceable they might be. Han and Leia lead the Endor expedition to blow up the shield generator. They do this fairly well, I'd say, but they don't really seem to bring anything to this table that other rebel leaders wouldn't. Lando blows up the Death Star itself. I guess Wedge contributes as well, but I don't know. I have no idea how useful this is. Lando seems to be a really good pilot. He does pretty well to stay alive throughout this space battle, but there are a fair few other rebels that do that too. And though it seems getting to the core of the Death Star is actually pretty hard, doing that and shooting up the main reactor is probably something one of the other pilots could have done instead. In fact, seriously, they'd be better suited to it. Why is the Falcon doing this?
It was too close.
And then, of course, there's Luke. Luke decides to leave the Endor expedition to confront his father, Darth Vader, in the hope of turning him back to the light side. And also because Yoda tells him he can't call himself a Jedi until he crosses off that next step on his hero journey list. Now, of course, Luke is successful in this endeavor, but is it really necessary for winning the battle and, by extension, the war against the Empire? As far as I can tell, if Luke fails, the battle ends pretty much the same way. The good guys may well fare even better if Luke just stays on Endor. At worst, this would mean they have to contend with Darth Vader as well, but I imagine he and Luke would more or less cancel each other out, leaving the others to do what they were going to do anyway. Maybe even making it easier for the others to do their thing if their dueling distracts enough stormtroopers. At best, it would mean Luke doing a whole lot more of this, probably making it an absolute cakewalk in the park for the others. Maybe Leia wouldn't be injured, maybe R2-D2 wouldn't get fried, and maybe we'd be spared the most heartbreaking scene in all of Star Wars. I don't think we can actually blame all that on Luke though. He doesn't know there's an entire legion of my best troops on Endor until the Emperor tells him. It makes sense for the story to isolate him with Vader and the Emperor like this, but of all the heroes in this film, strangely enough, I think his contribution to the final victory is the least significant. And now for C-3PO. What does he do exactly? Why do I think he's so bloody useful? Well, at several points throughout the trilogy, C-3PO's multilingualism comes in pretty handy, but never more so than when he speaks teddy bear. Not only does this ability enable 3PO to help save everyone's lives when Luke tricks the Ewoks into thinking he's a vengeful god about to rain fire or something, possibly the most useful thing Luke does in this film by the way, but even more importantly, this ability enables 3PO to get the Ewoks on board with the rebel cause through the sheer power of storytelling, aided somewhat by the fact that they think he's a god. C-3PO is the best storyteller since John Hurt. He's lively, does uncannily accurate sound effects, and at one point he jumps from what sounds like Luke blowing up the Death Star to Cloud City, and I don't know how he does that, but you can't say he isn't concise. He recaps those first two films like no one's business. Except the one-man Star Wars guy, maybe. He's definitely better at this than our other heroes would be. Can you imagine Han Solo trying to win hearts and minds? The Ewoks are well into this story, and pretty much as soon as 3PO's finished, they're on board with the rebel cause. Love them or hate them, they make a confoundingly huge difference. So much so that I'm pretty sure the rebels would not win the day without them. Han, Leia, Chewie and friends would be doomed, which means the shield generator would stay intact, which means the Death Star would stay intact, which means the Imperial fleet and Death Star would probably continue to pick away at the rebel fleet until it's nothing. And as far as we can tell, the Ewoks would never join the fight without 3PO.
We are now a part of the tribe.
Now this might have you thinking, well, if 3PO's not around, surely that just means what Luke does ends up being vital. Maybe. Let's play that out. Luke and his dad would probably still overthrow the Emperor, but I imagine this means his dad still dies too, leaving Luke alone on a fully armed and operational battle station, probably still being run like normal by, I don't know, one of these guys. I guess Luke could maybe take over the Death Star on his own, but even if he does, surely that takes a while. This thing's huge, and who knows how far he is from the control bridge. The rebel fleet would suffer far more losses in the meantime, and let's not forget his buddies on Endor are probably captured or dead at this point. Even if he does take control of the Death Star, then there's the rest of the Imperial fleet to worry about. Are they going to lay down arms just because Luke gets on the intercom and says, "Hey you, Star Destroyer dudes, this is Luke Skywalker. Your Emperor's dead, Darth Vader's dead, Death Star's mine now, why don't you just call it quits, eh?" I mean, they might. Maybe this is just a job for them. I don't know how much they care about the Imperial cause. But if they don't, if their response is more like, "Who's this? This a prank? I ain't never heard of no Luke Star Killer or whatever your name is, get lost," then that's a whole lot of Star Destroyers you still got to contend with, man. And maybe Luke can just shoot them all with the Death Star, but it looks like it takes a lot of people to operate that big laser thing. And I know he's got the Force so he can do stuff to buttons from a distance, but it's not a very intuitive setup they have there, is it? Look, I think you get my point. As super capable as Luke is, even in the best case scenario following failure to blow up the shield generator,
You rebel scum.
victory takes a lot longer and results in far more rebel casualties than if they do succeed in blowing up the shield generator, quickly followed by the Death Star. Therefore, I think we can safely say that C-3PO's contribution really is crucial. Disappointing as it may be that 3PO doesn't get more recognition for his contribution, I doubt I'm the first person to make this point, but I haven't seen it expressed much elsewhere. I think there's something useful we can learn here. You don't have to be the guy with the laser sword to make a difference. As admirable as brave and dramatic deeds often are, it will always matter more how effective the deed is, especially in comparison to what might have been done otherwise. Which means, even if you don't think you have any special skills,
I'm not much more than an interpreter, and not very good at telling stories.
whatever skills you do have may well be special in the right context. And unlike 3PO, there's quite a lot you can do to seek out what that context might be. If you're interested in doing something like that, I could not recommend highly enough that you check out the website for a non-profit called 80,000 Hours. Much like how I just analysed the effectiveness of certain characters' actions in Star Wars, the fine folks over at 80,000 Hours analyse the effectiveness of stuff you can actually do in real life. That's a fair bit more complicated, so it's a good thing they're smarter than me. In case you're wondering, by the way, this isn't a sponsored bit, I'm just a fan. I think what they do is really useful, not only for the world, but quite possibly for you too, since helping others can be a major part of a satisfying career. It's generally a lot harder to figure this kind of thing out on your own. Simply following your own intuition is probably only going to get you so far.
I'll try spinning, that's a good trick.
Because much like in Return of the Jedi, the best ways to make a difference in real life can be quite surprising.
I'm out of it for a little while. Everybody gets delusions of grandeur.
So there you go. You don't have to be the obvious hero type to save the world, galaxy, or whatever. However, unintentionally, Return of the Jedi turns out to be a pretty good example of how those that have the greatest impact can be the ones we least expect.
Thanks, Patrikios.
I never knew I had it in me.